Welcome to the Always On podcast. I am your host, Duncan MacPherson. And on this podcast, our objective is to enable our audience, which are very high caliber fee-for-service professionals, to always be working on their business and on themselves. On today's podcast, I had a great conversation with Louis Diamond. Louis is well known. He's a consultant and guide to top financial advisors and RIAs. He's the president at Diamond Consultants. And in this episode, we talked about having a very thoughtful, methodical approach to establishing a great fit when transitioning from one environment to another, how to position that carefully and professionally with your clients, and how to maximize the efficiency and profitability and enterprise value of your business. If you like this podcast, please like and share, tell your colleagues. And if you have any ideas for topics you'd like to hear on this podcast down the road, let us know. Thank you for listening. Well, we're in for a very lively and enlightening conversation. I'm joined by Louis Diamond at Diamond Consultants. Louis, how are you? Good to see you.
I'm doing great, Duncan. Thanks for having me on today.
So my perspective is Diamond Consultants, you and your team assist financial professionals in transitioning from one firm to another. I would love to hear your value proposition and what makes you different through your lens, if you don't mind, if we start there.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the question to kind of set the table here. So our business model, we've been pretty much doing the same thing for almost 30 years when my mom and partner, Mindy Diamond, founded our business. It's fairly simple. We represent financial advisors or wealth managers or independent financial advisors, registered representatives, whatever the terminology might be, who have a minimum of 50 million of assets under management that they can move with them to a new organization. We're agnostic where an advisor is currently practicing, whether they're at a big wirehouse, they're already independent, they work for an RIA, they're at a private bank, and we're completely open architecture with how we can represent advisors, meaning we're not on retainer by any one particular firm, and we have over 450 different firms and platforms and custodians that we can help educate advisors on. So our value prop is fairly simple. It's advisors who are looking for professional representation in navigating probably the most important, if not one of the most important decisions of their life. It's, do I stay or do I go? And if I decide that I'm unhappy enough or there's things I want to solve for, what should I do? Should I go independent for the first time? Should I sell my business? Should I change employers? And if I do, how do I make sure I'm not going to regret this? So that's fairly simple. Our value prop to advisors is just helping them through a very difficult decision as their trusted resource and guide.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I have my interpretation around what makes you different because there's others in that space. What do you feel makes you different?
Yeah, there's a lot of folks who compete with us or try to compete with us. The truth is, with my industry, there's no barriers to entry. There's no licensing requirements. All you really need is phone numbers and a telephone, and most firms are willing to give you a recruiting contract. So just the fact that we are recruiters and consultants does not make us different. And there's a lot of folks that are very competent at representing advisors as well. I think what makes us different is the depth of our experience. We've helped transition over $250 billion of assets under management in the last 8 years alone. In a given year, we'll transition approximately 25% of teams who manage $1 billion or more who ultimately decide to make a transition. And we're very, very focused. We're not chasing other types of roles other than executive level financial advisors. And everything we do starts and ends with what's best for the advisor. So instead of trying to pitch people on a certain firm or who's paying the most or what's going to make me the most amount of money, it's much more about being an objective guide and resource for advisors, basically treating them like they handle their own client engagements, right? You're going to recommend what's best for that individual, and you're not going to sell a variable annuity because you might make more. You're going to help them with reaching their goals. And we look at it in a very similar way.
Well, and I got that as I got to know you a little bit better and spend some time in your website. I did feel the distinction between transactional and directional consulting. You're more collaborative in terms of how you engage with the advisor. I will say it's a lot more fun to say a quarter of a trillion than it is to say 250 billion. That just seems like a much bigger number.
Hey,
I saw an image
we've
the
been
other
working hard
day.
we've been working hard to get over that threshold. So I feel like we deserve the we deserve that shortcut.
I saw an image the other day of what $1 trillion looks like if it were to be stacked on pallets. It's pretty high, pretty impressive. Now, back to your mileage as a firm and your reputational equity, it is unrivaled. And I follow Mindy as well as yourself on LinkedIn, very, very active. But I've noticed beyond experience and track record, you've really gone deeper into the realm of thought leadership. I I made the mistake of asking somebody on my team to print this out for me because I saw it on your website and I thought it was going to be like a 3-page leaflet. It's called the Diamond Consultants Advisor Transition Report. And it is a pretty substantial document. I think you owe me about $17 in paper and ink because I feel smarter just holding this thing. It is so substantial. But I notice how the data and how deep you go. This is an absolutely powerful resource to help somebody start activating their scenario planning and strategic planning in terms of making that move. So great job on that. It's a great tool.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, it takes us a lot of time to create, but we started doing it about 3 years ago because we were looking for data like this and couldn't really find it. Wanting to know which firms were recruiting the most, which firms were losing advisors, and just to get some thought leadership in one place of the major trends that are facing advisors. There's somewhat similar reports that track RIA mergers and acquisitions, whether it's the Echelon or the DeVoe reports. They do a really good job. And we felt like there's a gap in the advisor recruitment side. You didn't ask, but I'll share a couple of quick takeaways so that someone maybe doesn't have to read all 25 pages or whatever it is. A couple of the big findings we had this year were first that advisor movement was up 7% from 2022 to 2023. And what we do, we try to take out entry-level folks or trainees, and we try to focus on folks that had a material length of service in the industry. So we think that's a real number. It's not just tracking headcount, but it's like the real bona fide advisor movement. So advisor movement remains strong, even with interest rates being really high, with the markets being up and down and being choppy. But we think it's because there's more options than ever before for talented financial advisors. It used to be when this business started, it was just if you're doing over $1 million in production, first off, you were a monster. There weren't that many $1 million producers, but there were very few options. You probably went to Smith Barney or Payne Weber or Wells Fargo or Merrill. We didn't see this proliferation of choice that advisors have. So right now, it's still that approximately 50% of the time, advisors will make a move within their own industry channel. So if I'm practicing at UBS, I'm probably the most likely to go to another major wirehouse. But what's notable is the other 50% is a massive long list of firms that have been very successful at meeting advisors where they are, whether it's breakaways, which is probably about 25 to 30% of movement from a big wirehouse firm. It's regional firms like Raymond James and RBC, newer entrants like Rockefeller and Crescent. So advisors have choices, and it's more likely now than ever before that if you feel a certain level of pain or unhappiness and you're motivated to do something differently, that something exists that's going to meet your needs, which may not have been the case a number of years ago.
Okay, excellent. You covered a lot of ground there. Yeah, and I think the document itself is 25 pages, but then you also bolster it with case studies. You give a great window into the lab of a scenario of an advisor, which I think is very, very insightful. Lots of data. I'm curious because we also consult with advisors on how to prime and get out in front of a move and how to establish where the good fit is and how to actually go into motion. I'm curious, have you seen what motivates an advisor to transition from one firm to a next changed in the last 10 years? Because I have. I'd like your perspective on that.
It's a great question. And I'll give my answer, but then I'd like to turn the microphone around to you and hear from your vantage point the change. I think probably I'll give you three things that I've seen change firsthand. The first one is advisors, when they transition, everyone's frustrations or pain points or situation is unique to them. It's like a fingerprint, right? Like everyone experiences things differently, has different businesses, et cetera. But the three buzzwords that kind of encapsulate everything is freedom, flexibility, and control. That's what advisors want more of. And when they consider change, they're typically frustrated by a diminished amount of those three things, or that's what that's going to be their lens for evaluating another firm. So that's one, is just I think the common pain points are more about autonomy than ever before. The second one is we've seen advisors become much more long-term oriented. So we still see some folks who they move every 10, 12 years to get a check. Nothing wrong with that. It's their prerogative. They deserve it. But more times than not, we're seeing folks move, even if they're somewhat happy, because they are looking to protect the business for the next generation, or they want to build something that's truly theirs, where they own the equity and they can customize everything. And we're seeing teams, even teams that are younger, who in the past they used to be, I'm 40 years old, I'll go take a deal from a firm. When I'm 50, I'll have a lot more money in my bank account and I can go independent. Now we're seeing that if an advisor is, let's say, sub 45, sub 50, they're much more likely to want to become business owners than ever before. So I think that's change number two. And then I think the third change we've seen is that advisors are looking to do more for clients. So I think fee compression, you'll probably agree, is not really happening like it's been like has been predicted. But advisors face more competition from robos, discount brokerages, self-directed platforms, tons and tons of RIAs, all the major banks, insurance companies. So advisors have to do more for clients to protect their same fee level. So whether that's tax services or estate planning or more concierge and family office services, bespoke private investments, advisors are they're either looking for access to more or to have the shackles taken off where they can offer more, to have a more defensible position in both keeping their current clients, but also as they're prospecting against folks that can probably do it for cheaper, and folks that have a lot of really impressive capabilities.
Okay, well, first of all, very, very in-depth and also validating for me because we're seeing the same or hearing the same things from advisors. It's funny, 10 years ago, I would just ask the question in a strategic planning conversation with an advisor, just say, why? Like, why are you planning on making a transition? And before it was more about sort of complaining about the firm moving the goalposts, or I don't like my manager, or just something that they didn't feel great about. Now it seems like they're focusing more on where's all this going? What does this look like in the next 5 to 10 years? And how does this impact my clients' evolving needs? So that's great to hear. I do want to ask you in a moment while I'm thinking about it, about why so many advisors tend to kick the can down the road. I mean, these are lifelong planners, and then they tend to wait to the last second before they get organized. But hold that thought for a second, because I'm curious. I'd like your feedback on this, because when we do a diagnostic with a team about fit, trying to establish fit, we frame it in an acronym. It's PSP. Because you know how in the old days it was almost entirely economic, right? It was an economic decision. Fair enough. Now, PSP is establish an alignment of interest based on philosophical fit, strategic fit, and practical fit. In that order. The practical fit is the economics. But let's leave that for the end. Let's focus on the why, and not why you're leaving. Why do you want to elevate?
Right.
The philosophical is the environment around the firm, the concept of independence, the concept of, we're investing in our infrastructure and our platform for our advisors. Is it an environment of stewardship instead of salesmanship, regarding proprietary product and things like that? Philosophical fit, strategic fit. How does my client benefit? This is so incredibly important because ultimately the messaging, the words matter in terms of a client-facing interaction, rationalizing for them, this is why we're doing this. So I'll get more into that in a moment. And again, back in the day when an advisor would say to me, I'd ask them why, and they'd say, well, because I can get a check. And I go, are you going to tell your clients that's why you're moving? And obviously that's a little bit uncomfortable, but that's a bygone era. The third is obviously that practical fit around compensation, not just in terms of income, but how is this going to impact enterprise value so I can fully monetize my life's work? That's oversimplified, but I'm curious how you feel about that frame and if that lines up with the way you see this.
It definitely does. Every engagement we have with an advisor or a team, we take them through a 20-question self-assessment. And they're more of the qualitative questions, what's frustrating you? If you had a magic wand, what would a new firm look like? How important is an upfront deal versus payout versus equity? They're questions just to give us a really good understanding of how best to make recommendations to that advisor. But it also fits with our philosophy, which is you got to know what you're solving for before you dive into action. So you have to kind of build the plan, kind of the framework by which you're going to evaluate other options. Because I think a big reason advisors kick the can down the road, especially with transitions, is transitions are hard work. And at the end of the day, no financial advisor, those quality ones, are going hungry. That they're all making decent money for the most part. Right. Even the most unhappy financial advisor has much more autonomy than a typical office worker who's a coder or who's in the construction industry. So advisors have a pretty good gig. So what you're saying fits very well with our philosophy, which is beginning with the end in mind and being strategic about how you view things. And then you can kind of make heads and tails of all the different options that are out there. And on the economics, like we said, the longer term orientation tends to win. I always say that financials have to make sense, but they shouldn't be the end all be all. If all else was equal, you have two options that you really like that kind of fit all your criteria. One's paying you 350% of your trailing 12, one's paying you 275. Of course, you're going to go to the 350. But usually economics kind of work, especially if you look at payouts and some of the longer term implications, where everything's like, you can make the case that everything is relatively equal. So let's kind of take the financials out of it. Let's make a truly objective decision and then move forward. And if you can't make sense of the economics because you have a lot of unvested deferred compensation or whatever your own personal reason is, that's completely fine. But typically we can try to make decisions on what's best for the client, where am I going to grow the fastest, what's the best long-term home, and then we'll make sure the economics make sense. And our job is to negotiate the best possible financial package for an advisor or a team if they are considering change. So it's not like we're advocating to operate like a nonprofit and you shouldn't try to enrich yourself. It's more so if you solve for the other things, the economics tend to follow.
Okay, that's very gratifying. It completely aligns. And I say countless times, get the why and the how right, and the where will pretty much take care of itself, like who you're going to align with, where you're going to go, but the why and the how. So question for you. I know the advisor transition report, that's essential reading. That's on your website. Are the 20 questions on your website as well? Is that accessible?
We have a shortened version on our website for a good reason. We hold back the good stuff for folks that are engaged in our process. But on our website, there is kind of a preview of what it looks like and some of the questions. But yeah, for the most part, that's like the key part of our process. So that's not something we'll widely distribute unless we're engaged with an advisor or a team.
Okay, excellent. I noticed in consuming some of your IP that you use the metaphor of the Sherpa. which is near and dear to my heart as well. I think that that's what I am. I think that's what a financial advisor is. I'm bringing this up because I'm curious, because I often remind people that the reason why a climber hires a Sherpa is not to get to the summit and plant the flag. It's to get back down and live to tell the story successfully, because every adventure is either an example or a warning, right? An example, this is how you do it, or a warning, cautionary tale, don't do this. So you spend a lot of time on the fit process. How you start a relationship has a profound impact on how it's going to endure. I'm curious, do you spend as the Sherpa any time with the client-facing positioning and what it looks like for the advisor after the dust settles?
Yeah, that's a key part of it. That is especially as decisions are getting closer to being made, and maybe it's between 2 or 3 firms, a perspective we give advisors is, why don't you think through, if you were calling your clients the day you resign, what would the pitch sound like to these different firms? Is there enough meat on the bone, if you will, to justify this? So like, great, you make a lot of money in this move. It's great because you can grow faster. It's great because you can pay your assistant more, or you're not going to have to sell checking accounts anymore. But if you can't convincingly articulate specifics for why this is going to be good for a client, you shouldn't be doing this. And it's a helpful way just to say, okay, let's take the names out of it and let's be objective. If I were the client who got these 3 to 5 bullet points about these 3 different firms, which one would I want to go to? And it's really important. It's work we do to help advisors clarify kind of the distinction between what are okay, this reason makes sense, but you got to connect the dots. So if you say, I'm doing this because I can serve you with more flexibility, that doesn't really mean anything. What's this? How specifically can you serve this client with more flexibility? Well, now I can offer you banking services from 15 different firms rather than 1. I have the ability to add subject matter experts to my team where I couldn't before. I don't have to jump through a bunch of red hoops in order to help you on your account that's in Argentina. So you have to be specific, I think, with each individual client, but really go the distance to make it easy for them to say, yeah, this is a no-brainer. Like, I get why you're doing it, but this makes a ton of sense for my family to change all of our accounts and set up direct deposits again and to repaper the account and to trust you that this is the right move for my family. So it's a very important part of our process, but I think it could also be a helpful way to objectively evaluate different options an advisor is considering.
Okay, that's terrific. Okay, so I'm going to ask your opinion on another aspect of what we do when we engage with an advisor in this exercise. We have this process called advisor flight plan. And we use that as a sort of a symbol because it's like a pilot with a checklist, right? They're pulling back, getting ready and they're going through their list. Preparation. So in our view, there's 3 steps: prime for takeoff, takeoff, and then land.
Got to land. Yep.
Right. So we ask the advisor to get so far out in front of the priming phase. And so let's just say an advisor says, I think we want to make a move in 6 months, but we're obviously keeping this under wraps.
Yep.
We'll say, in the next 90 days, I want you to say this to your clients in a phone call or a meeting. Every single phone call meeting you have in the next 90 days, I want you to say this. Mr. and Mrs. Client, I just want to let you know that as a firm, we're going through an exercise for the purposes of elevating the client experience. We like what we do. We love our clients, but we know we can always raise the bar. So we've engaged a consulting firm to identify best practices and tweaks in our approach that can take it to the next level. And we're very excited about this. I just wanted to sort of plant that seed. You'll be seeing outcomes of this over the coming months. I'm curious how you feel about that. The advisors who do that they come back to us and say, this is so powerful for planting a seed, but also getting me, the advisor, emotionally prepared.
Yep.
So I'm not springing it on anybody. I'm planting seeds. Thoughts on that?
I think it's a great idea, and it's the perfect way to frame it. The caveat I would give is a lot of our clients are employed by a bank or a wirehouse or a private bank, and you have to be a little bit careful with doing that.
Of course.
So I know a lot of advisors with maybe their top handful of clients or their clients they know are personal friends, they'll say something similar. You obviously can't give specifics of we're considering going to Raymond James or we're going to do this, we're leaving on this day. I think if you're careful and scripted and you do it with a handful of the right people, it's powerful for the reasons you said. Where I think you can get broader, you can use that concept more broadly is if someone's already independent. If they own their business, they own their data, they're independent contractors of LPL, let's say, then you don't have the same, I guess, obligations to your employer because you're the employer. And it's just, you can be a little bit more liberal with kind of letting the cat out of the bag, if you will. So concept is awesome. The framing was great. Just with the one caveat, I'm not a lawyer, but just to be careful of running amok of your employment agreement.
Yeah, and good point, because as a consulting firm, we tend to not get hired by employees. We get hired by entrepreneurs. These are the advisors who don't refer to it as a book of business. It's an actual business, enterprise value, and of course,
no doubt,
proprietary. So a customized podcast can add credibility and efficiency to your communication efforts, sifting good prospects from the mass of suspects, staying top of mind with strategic partners, and activating more advocacy from existing clients can be achieved with a turnkey approach. Learn more at proudmouth.com. The best place to strengthen a client relationship is in the very place where you manage that relationship. BlueSquareToolkit.com has harnessed the best practices of Pareto systems and brought them to life in our easy-to-use system that is accessible on both your phone and your desktop. Simple technology to uncomplicate your life by creating clarity, accountability, and consistency for your entire team. Build stronger client relationships by tracking and archiving essential information on what matters in your client's life, and make yourself indispensable and more referable in the process. Create a more consistent client experience and grow your business with the Blue Square Toolkit. Visit BlueSquareToolkit.com to get your 14-day free trial today. Another little distinction is when the rubber hits the road and it's go time, we put a lot of emphasis on the messaging and the positioning. And I'd like your feedback on this, because we say to the advisor, be sure to pay tribute to what you're about to leave, and then explain and rationalize why you're going, and always make it about the client. Don't make it about yourself. Yep. So in other words, if you're my client, Lewis, and I'm the advisor, we're having a strategy and tactical meeting, and I say, Lewis, you remember a couple of months ago I mentioned on the phone that we're going through this exercise as a team, and I just want to let you know, as we've gone through this, it's been incredibly revealing. And after extensive due diligence, we've made a decision to transition our business to a new environment. And I can't wait to unveil that to you. Our current environment has been phenomenal. For the last 12 years, it's served us incredibly well. But our clients' needs are becoming so complex, and they're evolving so dramatically, that we wanted to get out in front of that. And that's why we've chosen this environment. And ultimately, as we lay this out for you, we hope that you see the merit in joining us. So let me stop there. Thoughts on that positioning?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I agreed. Like, no one, just think of anything you're buying, if you're going to buy a car, if you're going to really purchase anything, you're not going to receive the information well if the salesperson is bashing, oh, like you should buy the Porsche because the BMW is terrible. Like it's just, you come across as lacking humility. And I think you have to give credit where credit's due. And then exactly what you said, what's in it for the client? I think another two things that I like to suggest is included is first, take the elephant out of the room, that this is something we've been working on. It's something that we've been thoughtful in. And I apologize that we couldn't let you know sooner. A lot of times advisors report their clients feel jilted, or they feel like this is coming out of nowhere. And they want to know, I just saw you last week golfing. Why couldn't you say anything? So I think being proactive to say, because of the terms of our employment agreement, the nature of our relationship with XYZ firm, I hope you appreciate we have to keep this confidential. But it's something that's we've been thinking about this for a while. We're doing it for the right reasons. Here's the 3 to 5 reasons why this is happening. The one distinction to make is in the concept of broker protocol. So broker protocol is basically a ceasefire that was created back in 2004 by most of the large brokerage firms. Until 2017, all the major players were part of it. Morgan Stanley, UBS, Wells Fargo, Ray J, RBC, all the independent firms. But in 2017, UBS and Morgan Stanley pulled themselves out of the protocol, and firms like Goldman Sachs, many of the private banks, were never part of it. So if you happen to be in a situation where you're leaving a non-protocol firm or you're joining a firm that's not part of protocol, your script has to be different because you're not allowed to directly solicit the client. So again, not a lawyer, consult your attorney or your employment agreement, and your positioning probably has to be a little bit different if you're subject to a non-protocol transition. You can still talk to the client, but we call it an announcement call. So instead of, here's the reasons why, I hope you'll come with me, it's more of just the very matter-of-factly, I wanted to let you know that I'm no longer with RBC, I'm now with Rockefeller, or whatever the case may be. And then you have to wait for the client to ask you questions. So just a small wrinkle. Don't want anyone to get overzealous with how they're communicating this and get in legal trouble. But at its core, I'm completely in lockstep with your approach and your framework.
Yeah, and those are great insights. And but the bottom line is, make no assumption this is a fit process. The client has to come to their own conclusions that this is in their best interests.
No doubt.
I am curious about this as well. I spoke to an advisor not long ago, and I said to him, I said, at the end of the conversation with the client, like, just read the room. But at the end of the conversation, just if you see merit, just simply say, hey, one last thing. I just want to let you know that my soon-to-be former environment is going to work really hard to try to keep the assets. So here's what's going to happen. A SWAT team is going to be deployed and rappel from the roof and work really hard to try to convince you. And obviously, it's entirely up to you. I'm led by you, but I just wanted to let you know that that's going to happen. I'm not going to try to convince you to do anything. I hope you see the merit. I hope it's a good fit. Anyway, it was the advisor told me there was there's levity in the conversation and just sort of painting a picture that way. And he did say that, there were clients who sort of immediately came to the advisor's defense.
Yeah.
Like I'm connected to you.
Yep.
So I'm curious how you feel about that.
I really like that. I've never suggested that to an advisor, but I think it's the right guidance because, again, if you're leaving an independent firm where you own the business, you own the data, you probably don't have to do that because your firm is not going to try to redistribute your accounts and keep them. But most advisor transitions, you're leaving a captive environment where legally the former employer owns the client. And I have air quotes up for people that are just listening, this on the audio. But it's gotten very aggressive when advisors leave. A lot of firms will offer free fees for a year or 6 months. They'll throw every insult and every bit of shade at the client. Oh, he left just to get paid. Oh, I heard he's retired. He had a regulatory issue. I looked at his investment performance. It's horrible. So I think priming the client ahead of time of what to expect I agree. I always like adding levity. It helps, but it also prepares the advisor for what I agree with you is going to be a SWAT team that all of a sudden, after never caring about the client once, is all of a sudden doing everything they can to try to retain them. So I like that.
Okay, excellent. I did notice in the advisor transition report, you made reference to something that's new in this space, and this is the private equity participation and around a sell and stay. Is that part of your world?
It is. It's so we do some mergers and acquisitions work with independent firms. So it's always been part of the world. But I think what you're referring to is a very real, it's not even a trend. It's happening right in front of us. But it's I think the realization or the light bulb moment from all the different private equity sponsors that are in the space, either who have picked their horse, they picked the Beacon Points or the Cap Trust or the Mariners, and we get probably 15 calls a week from new private equity firms or family offices that are looking to deploy capital in the space. But it's the realization that the RIA market, if you're looking to buy firms, is somewhat bid up. The price has gotten out of control. There's so much competition, and there's a finite number of quality M&A targets. And what was really missing was there's these amazing practices that might sit within a wirehouse. They're amazing advisory teams. They grow, they service clients on their own. They're world-class professionals. We've just haven't really understood the marketplace and haven't been able to figure out a deal structure that marries where they're coming from, which is a competitive situation. You don't own the data, a lot of the implications we've been talking about, but that we have something that other firms can't offer. Perhaps we can structure a deal at long-term capital gains. We can offer equity. We can offer them greater autonomy and agency over their businesses. So we're seeing this phenomena unshape in two different formats. The first one is, and this happens somewhat rarely, but a private equity sponsor or a family office staking a team directly who wants to launch their own de novo independent firm. An example would be, there's a firm called Sapient out in Indiana. I think it was a $10 billion team who left Stifel, and Lee Equity Partners backed them upon their transition and took a significant stake in that business. So there's options like that, typically for larger teams who are very entrepreneurial, who either have a partner who's retiring out and needs to monetize, or I think with this team, I didn't work with them directly, but I've heard of them. They really wanted to focus on recruiting other advisors over and doing M&A, and felt like they needed institutional capital to do it. So that's one available option. Firms like Focus Financial have launched probably 10 to 15 de novo RIAs out of a wirehouse. So that's there. The second one, which is much more, I'd say, easier, and we're seeing it more often, is a large, typically national RIA firm backed by a private equity sponsor who has the platform built. They have compliance, they have tax, they have technology coming in and in essence buying the business of an advisor. So whether it's an event around retirement as an alternative to a sunset program that a lot of the firms have, or it can even be a 40-year-old advisor who wants to monetize their business at long-term capital gains and is really excited about the equity opportunity of, instead of just owning their own business, now I've been able to basically trade my equity for the currency in a firm that I think is going to be much more valuable over the long run. So it's not going to be this type of option. It's not going to take 50% market share. I think maybe it represents, when it's all said and done, 5 to 10% of wirehouse advisor moves. That's a pretty meaningful amount. And I love this concept. One, it's something fresh and new and exciting, but it bolsters our argument, which is it's the strongest seller's market we've ever seen for advisors. And when advisors have more choices, it means they can make better decisions for their clients. It also means advisors have way more leverage in the marketplace than ever before, because a quality team leaving a firm, they can go to another wirehouse, and all 4 wirehouses are recruiting again. You can break away and go independent. You can join a private equity-backed RIA. You can go to a regional firm. You can go to a Rockefeller. So with more choices just means that I think deals will still stay elevated for a longer period of time. And it means advisors, I think, can be more thoughtful about the best option for them and their clients, because they don't have to go somewhere by default anymore.
Okay, perfect. It's interesting. I was speaking with Ted Duncan the other day, and I know you know him. He
Yep.
speaks highly of you, and we've done podcasts together, and you know that he's in this space. But it was interesting. We were talking about how, back when advisors shifted to advisory and all of the benefits of recurring revenue, and then the accountability of being fee worthy based on client experience, not performance, but just, what it means to be your client. That raised the bar quite significantly. But now advisors are starting to realize that enterprise value, uh, because of EBITDA and recurring revenue, but also because of other elements, is staggering today. And this is a new phenomenon over the course of the last probably 5 years or so. So on that point, I'm curious, when an advisor wants to monetize their life's work, we do focus obviously on the recurring and all of those quantitative fundamentals, but we remind them, you're not just managing money, you're managing a business. So what's proprietary that adds value to your enterprise? Your standard operating procedure and the consistency and the loyalty that creates, competitor proofing clients, capturing money in motion, advocacy. Those are key performance indicators. And then the relationship management piece. How deeply embedded are you into the family tree? I'm curious, do you play a role in the practice management and relationship management elements, or do you spend most of your time on the technical aspects of positioning for the transition?
It's usually the latter. And if we had an engagement with an advisor or a full business where they wanted to do more of the in the weeds kind of practice management type work, more of like the coaching work, I'd probably just pass along your email address and tell them to reach out to you. We have to be very knowledgeable about what are the value drivers, what's going to put you at the top end of the multiple range, what have the best advisors we've worked with done to most successfully position themselves. So we can kind of give them the framework, the things to work on, but we don't get in the weeds with trying to help them actually impact change on those types of items. And the only other thing I would add to your list, which is right, is organic growth net of market appreciation, aside from the size of the business, is by far the biggest driver of how valuable a business is. If a firm can grow, they're growing 8-10% per year or more, absent market appreciation, that's going to be a premium property. And we've seen businesses that manage half the assets as a larger counterpart get a higher multiple than because they're growing that much more. And it's not rocket science, especially if it's a private equity deal or it's an RIA who's acquiring the cash flow of the business. I think if a business in this industry every 5 to 7 years, I've heard, doubles. If a business grows, I think it's 8% per year, which is pretty much the return of the S&P 500, it can pretty much double. So if a business sustainably can grow, it's going to mean a far quicker return on investment for the acquirer. And that acquirer could be a private equity sponsor, it could be a strategic buyer, it could be a bank. Doesn't matter what segment of the industry, firms are going to pay more for properties that can grow organically net of what the market's going to do.
Okay, that is a very profound point. And I said this the other day to an advisor. I said, the way you manage money does not make your business more valuable.
Right.
Your performance does not make your business more valuable. It is these other elements, the client experience, net organic growth, like measurable and meaningful aspects. That's really great to hear. Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot. This might be a softball. What's the biggest fear an advisor will tell you they have as they approach the moment of truth?
That's easy. Will my clients follow me?
Right.
Like full stop, that's the biggest one. If you've approached the moment of truth, you've recognized the amount of work it's going to be, you've put in the effort to figure out what's working for you, what's not, what am I going to get from this new firm? You've negotiated a deal. The fear that all advisors have is, even if they've moved before or they have 20 relationships and all their clients are their best friends, is just fear of the unknown. Is I've heard that advisor left, he only brought 40% of the business, or I think I can bring over 100%, but what if only 85% comes? The line I use is, if an advisor knew with certainty that 90% of their business would follow them, my job would be a heck of a lot easier. it's kind of the long tail, if you will, that really keeps advisors up at night. And honestly, I don't blame them. It's their life's work. They spent all this time building this. Deals are oftentimes, the success of a deal is predicated on portability and how you hit certain earnouts or targets. So it's very, very important, but that's definitely the biggest thing in a transition.
Okay, excellent. So just a little peek into how I do expectation management with an advisor. I'd love your feedback on this. I say to an advisor who brings this up, I say, would you be at peace if 50% of your assets moved? And they often will say something like, well, it depends on the 50%. Like which 50%? Fair enough.
The good 50%.
And then I'll say, so, yeah, exactly. And then I'll say, so are there clients that are maybe not a good fit, and this is the opportunity to disassociate or allocate them to a different environment? That creates a different exercise, and that might represent 15 or 20% of their assets, their clients. So the advisor is actually going to grow down as they go into transition. So then we say, okay, so maybe now we're between 50 and 80%. Are you at peace with that? And they'll say, okay, this is getting better. And I said, so what if I could show you an approach where you could potentially get 100 to 120% of your assets to follow? Of course, that's a long pause. How do I do that? I said, here's what's fantastic. And this is not a theory. This is proven out time and time again. This is your opportunity to reframe and rejuvenate long-term relationships that might have gotten a little bit stale. Some of your clients, a little bit of loyalty fatigue might have seeped in. Maybe they don't fully understand and appreciate your value. This is almost a reset, a Control-Alt-Delete without the delete, to reinvigorate your clients and to get out in front of money in motion and to identify assets held outside of the process that might be monetized. And Louis, we see it all the time, where when the advisor is having this moment of truth conversation, this is happening. And then when the dust settles and the client has moved, that next meeting where they reintroduce themselves, they basically re-onboard their existing long-term clients, all kinds. It's a vein of gold in terms of advocacy. Oh, and I sold my property in Tahoe, or this biomedical IPO I did. I'm going to monetize on this, and it's because of the revitalization. I'm curious about your thoughts. Have you seen that happen in your experience?
I think it's a very refreshing approach to this exercise. I'm with you that a big, oftentimes underappreciated benefit of a transition is not inviting problematic clients or clients who no longer fit your vision for the future. There's a concept, we've talked about it on our podcast many times, called shrink to grow. So we have a number of examples or case studies of advisors who, let's use an example, 20% of their business is 401k consulting. It's maybe 80% of their assets, but it's 80% of their time and 20% of their revenue. In a transition, being intentional about saying, I'm going to leave that behind. While I might shrink as far as the metrics go, it's going to allow me to grow because now I have far more time to refocus what I'm doing on the value drivers of my business. And what you're saying too, I've heard it, especially when advisors go independent for the first time, they talk about how their business owner clients are so happy and excited. And if you can introduce the concept, I can manage your assets held anywhere. And just, I think being intentional about, like you said, reintroducing yourself to the client, it oftentimes unearths assets that they were afraid to bring over to your institution because they didn't want it concentrated. Or, oh, by the way, I said you can manage assets anywhere. I have like $1 million sitting in my Schwab self-directed account. Why don't we bring that over to you? So I think that's amazing. I'm always a big fan of trying to frame everything in a positive way. So I wrote a LinkedIn post about this. Like, when people think of advisor transition, like you asked me the question, like, what's the number one thing that advisors fear in a move? If you brought up advisor transition, 10 times out of 10, someone would just go, ugh. They would just deflate because of the amount of work and the risk and everything that goes with it. But I think framing it in the positive of you're doing this for a reason. There's opportunities to shrink to grow. There's opportunities to only work with your most ideal clients, and to refocus what you're doing is actually a positive thing. It's a gift. It's a kick in the butt, if you will, to do things in a different way. So again, I'm in lockstep with this approach. I love it.
Okay, excellent. I will say I've got diplomacy envy with your positioning, because I'm very much about being diplomatic with a client that's just not a good fit. But the way you said it, the way you positioned it might be another level of respect, to the point where you're conveying to somebody that I'm doing you a disservice by keeping you. You would be better off. Like I have immense respect for that degree of professionalism. So excellent. Quick question. Remind me, I mean, you deliver a lot of value, and I'm sure after the dust settles, you probably have advisors who say to you, Lewis, this has been so much better than I could have expected. And you're probably thinking to yourself that you should be getting trailer fees on the tail. But how do you get compensated, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot there?
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. So our compensation almost all comes from either a hiring firm, a custodian, a broker-dealer, a platform. Essentially, where are the assets that the advisor is transitioning? Where are they going to? That's where our fee comes from. It's similar to if you're buying a house. You decide to work with a professional realtor who's going to add all this value, help you with the transaction, be your confidant. You're not paying them directly. They're getting paid by the seller. It's somewhat similar. So the follow-up, even if you don't ask it, sometimes people say, well, doesn't that make you conflicted, right? Like if you're getting paid by Morgan Stanley and you're representing me with Morgan Stanley, doesn't that put you in a conflicted position? And the answer is, it certainly could. It is an imperfect compensation model, even though advisors get hundreds of thousands of dollars of advice and they don't have to pay for it. But because we represent the advisor and we have over 450 different firms that we work with, all of our clients know that we're trying to do what's best for the advisor. And we're not paid more by a certain type of firm. We're not going to make more because we helped Morgan Stanley get a better deal on an advisor. Ultimately, we want to be referable. We want everyone to be a reference for us. And our mandate is to get the best possible economic structure and help an advisor land in the best possible spot. So I went off on a little bit of a tangent, but the short answer is we're paid by a hiring firm or a platform. We do, in most cases, also charge a $5,000 fully refundable retainer. So $5,000 it's a loss leader. We're not going to run the business on $5,000 retainers. The reason we do it is because, one, we'll refund it back to the advisor or donate it to a charity of their choosing if they decide to transition. It just lets us know that the advisor has skin in the game. And I've found that if someone's paying for something, you probably find it similar with all your coaching services, they tend to value the advice more. And it allows me permission to say, I'm going to double down on this. I want to work harder for this advisor's behalf because they've invested in the process. So we're not building a business in $5,000 retainers. Most of it's coming from a firm, but that's in a nutshell how we're compensated.
Okay, but in the beginning, you talk about being agnostic and you're all about fit, helping the advisor galvanize where the alignment of interest is, what environment would be best suited for them and their clients based on who their ideal client is, et cetera. So that's fantastic. Last question for you. Mm-hmm. You've got a finger on the pulse in the industry. Do you think, even in a small way, you played a role in firms raising the bar and treating advisors like clients as opposed to profit centers? Because I feel that firms are stepping up and investing in resources and being panoramic around the value, not just asset management. Do you feel you might have played a small role in that?
Well, I'm honored to even have an opportunity to answer that question. I honestly, I'm going to take a bit of a more negative, I think, approach to that question. We're actually seeing more and more that advisors are feeling like their firms are treating them like profit centers. And the firms that are winning in recruiting right now, if you look at Raymond James, you look at an LPL, you look at many independent firms, I think they're winning because their whole mentality, their culture is that they're going to treat the advisor like a client. But if you look at a lot of the major financial institutions, advisors kind of go in eyes wide open, knowing that at the end of the day, the firm's going to look out for their shareholders, they're going to look out for them, and that the advisors are kind of looked at as being somewhat cogs in the wheel. So I said earlier, I like framing things in the positive, but we've actually seen, I think, firms kind of ratcheting up the pressures on advisors. And as they're trying to manage their risk, oftentimes the advisors are an externality in that process. So I'd like to think we've been very helpful to the industry and to advisors in making firms have more compelling advisor-facing value propositions, that they have to be more competitive with economics because it's so much more competitive. I do like to think we play a role in that, but I can't take credit for firms treating advisors more like clients because we kind of are seeing the reverse, which is a motivator for some considering change.
Well, and that's the contrast principle. So you're seeing some firms go in one direction and other firms go in the other. So the gulf is getting bigger. So that's a very interesting perspective. Right. Well, listen, an hour is come and gone pretty quickly here. Just a quick recap. Everybody, first of all, Lewis is an essential follow on LinkedIn, very active and obviously has a deep bench of very skilled, and the tenure of your team is very impressive.
Thank you.
That's number one. Number two, go to the website and download the Advisor Transition Report. It is great reading just to get your head thinking about this fully and completely. Anything else somebody should be looking for in terms of contacting you?
Yeah, I mean, all of our contact information is on my bio and whatnot. Feel free to reach out with questions. No, not going to charge you anything. There's no expectation. Always happy just to be a resource. We also do run our own podcast, the Diamond Podcast for Financial Advisors. And Duncan, you're going to be a guest coming up. So I've been trying not to write because we're on video, but you've already given me a lot of inspiration for questions that I want to delve deeper into for our audience, especially around the priming for a transition and the like. So our podcast, we interview the best advisors in the industry who have broken away to go independent, industry thought leaders like Duncan and many more. So that's, I think, another piece of content we can offer up to help make you a better and more informed advisor.
Okay, terrific. Great job, Lewis. And let's set a goal. I'll get you to Toronto when the Yankees are in town. We'll see a Blue Jays game, and then vice versa when I'm in New York. Okay, that'd be great because I'm a big fan. You absolutely got a deal,
no doubt.
Okay, excellent. And Rangers too. Are you a Rangers fan?
I'm a fair weather Rangers fan. I like watching the playoffs, but I'm more of a Devils fan myself.
Well, that's a good up-and-coming team, but the Rangers look dangerous, so it should be interesting. Okay, well, again, Lewis, great job. Kudos to you and your team. Say hello to Mindy, and we'll see you next time. I really appreciate you being
Thanks,
on
Duncan. Really appreciate
podcast. Okay, all the best.
Thank you for listening to Always On with Duncan MacPherson, where our objective is to enable professionals to always be working on their business and on themselves. Want to learn more about Duncan and his team? Visit ParetoSystems.com. Don't forget to click the follow button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the hosts and/or guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Pareto Systems. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast is powered by Proudmouth, the Influence Accelerators. If you're like me and want to spend more time educating people and less time selling, Proudmouth helps turn Main Street experts like you into trusted mainstream authorities. They will help amplify your influence over a growing audience of magnetically attracted fans. Visit proudmouth.com to learn more.